Hey, my name is Daniel and welcome back to another Slay the Spire the board game video, and today we're doing a tier list and breakdown of the Defect cards. As always, the goal of this series is not to highlight a certain quote-unquote best or worst cards, but rather to share my thought process and analysis and practical tips on when it's best to skip or pick those cards. And without further ado, let's get straight into it. Alright, so let's talk all about Defect rare cards today. And as always, before I go deeper into that, let's quickly define how my whole ranking system works. And in general, I tend to rank not based on the card's abstract power level, but rather on how often do I tend to skip or pick the cards. I think it's a more realistic reflection and a more just in general useful ranking compared to just purely looking at the card's power level, because most of the cards, they're good. The hardest part of course comes up with the fact, with the decisions whether you want to add this card to your deck or do you want to skip it. I think this is where the real deck building element comes into play. So as always, let's go alphabetically, starting with Beam Cell. It's an attack for 1 power. It deals 1 damage and with 50% chance it can also apply vulnerable. And if you upgrade it, it will be vulnerable 100%, no longer depends on the luck of the die. Now, Beam Cell is a pretty interesting card because it applies vulnerable, but one of the main sources of damage of a defect, at least when you just started out, is lightning orbs, and lightning orbs, they don't scale with this vulnerable debuff. But I actually quite like it, even if I go full on the lightning build, where I don't typically do a lot of hit attacks that scale with vulnerable. There are still at least a couple of cards that definitely do those hits. That means they do get the benefit from vulnerable, and even cards potentially like Thunderstrike on the lightning build or Blizzard on the frost build, of course. And if you're going full on the physical build, that says this is just even better. So all in all, I think Beam Cell is a fantastic card, with the only maybe 2 small caveats is first, of course, you do need to upgrade it, and ideally this is something I prefer to have somewhere maybe towards the mid or late game. Potentially if it comes already upgraded from the elite, that is even better. And the second caveat is that potentially maybe one case where I would skip this card, in a pretty rare case if we play with, full party and we have the Ironclad with Bash and we have Silent with Terror and we have Watcher with a couple of cards that apply vulnerable, so simply we don't need to have another source of vulnerable. But other than that, I'm pretty much always happy to have this card. So for me, that is a definition of an S tier, something I always pick regardless of what build I'm playing, what stage of the game, even though, as I said, I do generally prefer to have this in the mid to late game, but even in the Act 1 I will still likely pick this card. So Beam Cell, there we have it, our first S tier card. Moving on, next we have Blizzard. It's an attack for 1 energy, deal 2 raw damage for each frost orb you have, and if you upgrade it, it deals 3 damage instead. And well, there are a couple of things I actually quite like in this card. First, it is a raw damage. It means it deals damage to all the minions, or all the minions and the boss as well. And there are just so many encounters, especially elite encounters, where you definitely do want to have a lot of raw damage. But not only that, this card can scale, which I'm a big fan of. It means it deals 2 or even 3 damage times the number of frost orbs you have. So potentially, in a best case scenario, if you have upgraded Capacitor and you have channeled 6 frost orbs, it means this card can deal 18 damage, which is 6 times 3 to the entire row for 1 energy. This is an absolutely amazing value. Big thumbs up for that. Now, of course, you do need to have frost orbs in the first place, so it might be a little bit awkward as an early pick if you don't have any frost orbs to begin with, but generally speaking, I do tend to pick at least a couple of frost orb cards just to have this quote-unquote passive block. The only use case where I would definitely not pick this card if I know from the start that I'm going for a pure physical build without any orbs at all. But that is of course applicable to pretty much any frost card, not just Blizzard. I would likely pick those if I had something like Reprogram, for example, and of course we'll get to that card as well. But yeah, other than that, Blizzard is an amazing card. It could be an S tier. I mean, power level wise, it's definitely an S tier card for me. Even if you don't have 6 orbs, if you have, let's say just casually 2 orbs, that is still 6 damage on the upgraded side. to the entire row for 1 energy. That is still an amazing value. But as I said, there is still one use case where I would definitely not pick this one. That is if I'm going for purely physical build. So this is why it's going to be an A tier for me and not S, even though, as I said, power-wise it is absolutely an S tier card. Moving on, next we have Capacitor. It's a power for 1 energy and it gives you 2 extra orb slots, or if you upgrade it you're gonna have 3 orb slots, which does increase the value of all of your end of turn effects quite a lot. As a matter of fact, it is literally doubling the amount of damage you can potentially deal with lightning orbs or the amount of blocks you can passively gain at the end of turn with frost orbs. So the value of this card is amazing, and I would generally always pick this if I'm going for any kind of elemental build, whether I'm playing lightning and frost and even dark orbs. Even though we still have only 3 orbs in the supply, we cannot have all 6 dark orbs, but I think it's still just too good to skip even if playing on dark orbs. But as I said, as it always the case for all elemental cards that do something with the orb slots, I would of course not pick this one if I would know from the get-go that I'm going for a purely physical build, potentially like a claw build, things of that sort. This is why I cannot quite rank this on the S tier, but other than that, that is pretty much as good as you can have. This value is amazing and it will be an A tier for me for sure, even though whenever I play in any elemental build, this is the card I'm definitely picking, so that you can kind of think of as a conditional S tier. But if I go overall across all the different builds of Defect, that would be an A tier for me. I think that's just a bit more fair. Moving on, next we have Consume. It is another power for 2 energy. Orb evoke effects get +1, and if you upgrade it, it will cost 1 energy instead of 2, which generally makes it quite a big difference when it comes to playing any power. Now, evoke effects is something that all orbs have, but not every orb type gets the same value, and I would say, generally speaking, you get the most value out of dark orbs, because dark orbs not only they scale with the number of powers you have, so even whenever you play this Consume, your dark orbs affect and evoke for +2 damage, because this is a power itself plus 1 additional from this effect. For this reason, I generally like playing and having this card in my deck mostly when I'm going for the dark orb build, and I would not necessarily 100% pick it for other elements, even though of course lightning gets +1 damage as well, so this card is definitely quite decent on lightning as well, but maybe not so much so, not as much as on the dark build, which makes this card just slightly more situational. I mean, it's good, but there are definitely more considerations before picking it. Probably be on the B tier for me, even though I can totally see how some people might rank this all the way to S tier. In some situations it definitely could be an S tier card, but for me it's somewhere in the middle, especially if we go across all different builds of Defect. And speaking of dark orbs, we have a Darkness. It's a skill for 1 energy. You channel 1 dark, and if you upgrade it, it will become a 0 cost card, which is pretty nice. Now, dark orbs in general is the most hard-hitting main source of damage when it comes to single target at least, and naturally, because Defect has so many powers in general, it means your dark orbs, even without any additional effects, they can scale to a pretty decent damage. So overall, whenever I'm playing on any kind of elemental build, I do tend to pick at least 1 or maybe a couple of orbs, I mean the dark orbs specifically, though this particular card is not something I'm too happy about. I think there are just way better effects of getting darkness, especially on a rare card Rainbow. That is probably the best one as you can have, but even in another card that we're gonna talk about in just a minute, I think it still provides a little bit more value. My main issue with Darkness is that it's too slow, unlike of other orbs that you can play and that at least they will gain you some value at the end of turn effect, but because dark orbs they don't have any end of turn effect, it means you just playing this card and that's it. Nothing happens unless you evoke it by playing another card. So it is a little bit of delayed effect, which is why I'm generally not a huge fan of that. You're losing some momentum whenever you play this card. Of course, the dark orb itself is pretty nice, so this one probably will be on the lower tier for me, maybe even on the C tier. I mean, the dark orbs are great, but I think the value from this particular card is just not quite there for me, because sometimes if you don't have any evoke effects, so maybe your orb slots are not full, so whenever you play this darkness, sometimes it can just sit in your orb slots for a couple of turns and do nothing, so that can be a little bit an issue sometimes, even though of course towards the late game that's much easier to proc, much easier to evoke all the orbs, so it does get a little bit better as you play. But across the board, if I'll see this, let's say, as a very first card reward, I'm not sure I would pick this. This is why it is a C tier, even though it could be B as well, but no, I think C is probably more like it. And speaking of better cards, with orbs we have Doom and Gloom. It's an attack for 2 energy, deal 2 raw damage and channel 1 dark, and if you upgrade it, it will be 3 raw damage instead. Now, this card is twice as more expensive compared to darkness, but the fact that it does provide some immediate value, some front load damage that you can help to clear all the minions, gremlins and whatnot, and because it's an attack card, it potentially scales with vulnerable and all of the things. This is why choosing between the two, I always prefer having Doom and Gloom, even though it is a bit expensive. But I think dealing up to 3 damage to the entire row and channeling darkness is just a much better value overall. You're not relying on just proccing and not evoking this dark orb, but you're also dealing some damage along the way. So this is why for me it would likely be either a B or even the A tier card, and more likely A. Yeah, I think raw damage is just something I value a lot. It just helps so much against the Taskmaster and the Raptomancer and the Sentries and so many bosses. So yep, Doom and Gloom, there we go, that is an A tier for me. Oops, it jumped back for some reason. There you go, A tier. Moving on, next we have a double energy. It's a skill for 1 energy, and it says double your energy all the way to the maximum of 6 and then exhausted, and if you upgrade it, it becomes a 0 cost card. Now, without the upgrade, if it costs 1 energy, and let's say you don't have any ways of having additional energy, so you have only 3 energy, it means you first spend 1 to play this card down to 2, and then you double in, making it 4. So net gain is only just a single energy, which isn't too much. Which is why, generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of this card, at least on the non-upgraded side. If you upgrade it, of course, the value changes quite a lot, because with the same 3 energy that you start with, you double in, and because it costs 0, you just get 3 energy, which is 2 more compared to the non-upgraded side. But is it worth upgrading the card? I mean, on the campfire? And yeah, that is a bit of an issue for me, because in general, I wouldn't mind taking this card if it already comes upgraded, but I definitely wouldn't spend a very precious upgrade opportunity on this particular card. So this is why it probably will be on C tier for me, unless it comes upgraded. In that case, it will be likely be an B tier for me. So there you have it. Moving on, next we have Equilibrium. It's a skill for 2 energy, gain 3 block, and then you may retain 1 card this turn. And if you upgrade it, it changes quite a bit, because you get 4 block and you may retain up to 2 cards this turn. So this card definitely gets much more value on the upgraded side. And even though 2 energy for either 3 or even 4 block, that is quite expensive. I think there is just a better ways of gaining pure block, but the retain effect is super valuable. It sometimes allows you to play some combos which you wouldn't be play otherwise. For example, you can time the effect of vulnerable, or let's say if you just have a very expensive card in your hand that you cannot really afford playing this turn, but you don't want to discard it either. I think overall Equilibrium is a really good card, especially upgraded. It's probably not something you really need early on. It is definitely much more a late game card, maybe all the way, potentially even in Act 3. I don't think this is something I would take even in Act 2, but that being said, I still like it quite a lot, and that for me would be a B tier. So that is Equilibrium. And speaking of more ways of getting more block, we have Force Field. It's a skill for 3 energy, gain 3 block, but it costs 1 less energy for each power you have in play, and if you upgrade it, you get 4 block instead. Now obviously, this is not something you can play just casually on turn 1 while you don't have any powers yet, because 3 or even 4 block for 3 energy is obviously ridiculous, but Defect has so many useful powers, probably more than any other character really. So you pretty much always have at least 3 powers. I mean, it's not a problem to have that many powers on Defect 100%. And once you have those 3 powers at least, then it becomes a 0 cost 3 or 4 block, which is amazing value. I would say similar to Equilibrium, this is probably not something you would want early on. Potentially I will skip this card throughout the entire Act 1, but once you have a little bit more momentum, once you have more powers to play to begin with, then this card definitely becomes a very nice source of reusable, very cheap, potentially all the way to 0 cost, quite decent block. So probably be another B tier for me, something I would likely skip in Act 1, but to likely pick in Act 2 or 3. So that was Force Field. And now moving on, we have FTL. It's an attack for 0 cost, deals 1 energy, and if this is the first card you played this turn, draw 1 card. And if you upgrade it, it will deal 2 damage instead. Now, all of those 0 cost attacks on Defect, they may seem not like a big deal, just a single bit of damage. That may sound a bit ridiculous, but that is basically the entire, completely different way of playing Defect, with gaining a lot of 0 cost attacks and scaling your damage with Reprogram. This is something I talked about in my Defect guide. It is already on the channel. You can check it out if you missed it. It is a completely different way of playing this character, and so naturally just a single damage may sound a bit underwhelming, but you can scale all those physical attacks with Reprogram, which we'll talk about a bit later. And the main additional effect of this card is that if this is the first card you play this turn, you draw 1 card. Now, I think it's alright, but a bit too conditional. Sometimes you don't even have this card in your hand at the start of turn. You maybe play some cards that will draw more cards and then you take this card. So I don't really like that condition that you gain card draw only if you played this card this turn first. And overall, that is a bit too niche, a bit too situational. I want to say C, but well, honestly, if I'm being completely honest, that would likely be an F tier for me. It's not like because I don't like the physical build. It is very fun when you pull together, but I think there are just better cards. And this is not something I would take, sometimes even purely on physical build. So, sorry FTL, not a huge fan. Now, moving on, next we have Fusion, which is a power for 2 energy. At the start of turn, gain energy. And if you upgrade it, it becomes 1 cost card instead of 2. So at the start of turn, gain 1 energy is pretty much as good as any boss relics, but without any even downsides. The main, though, of course, there is still a downside that whenever you play this card you lose some momentum. You're not gaining anything on the turn you play, and it's only at the start of the next turn. So is it worth it? And overall, I would say yes, especially if you upgrade it. For just 1 energy, it is not as punishing as it could have been, at least not as bad as in for 2 energy, and it is still usually a little bit more kind of mid to late game card, not something I would necessarily want super early in the game, but in general, just having more energy every turn, yes please, that is a good card to have. Probably all the way to A tier, to be honest. I think it's really that good, with the only of course caveat that ideally you want to upgrade it, and ideally this is not super early pick, but other than that, that is a really good card. Moving on, next we have Glacier. It's a skill for 2 energy, gain 2 block and channel 1 frost. And so because frost also gives block at the end of turn, this is potentially the same as having 3 or 4 block depending if you have any other end of turn bonuses. But also in addition to that, whenever you channel any kind of orb, there's always an opportunity to evoke any orbs you already have, provided you have all orb slots already full with existing orbs. Oh, and by the way, I think I haven't checked the upgraded side. It now gives 3 block to any player. So this card gets a little bit nicer on the upgraded side, not only on the value of the block, but also some additional effects if you play with multiple players. And I think this card is alright. There are frankly better ways of gaining block, but if you want some frost orbs, this is probably the card you want. Now, if you manage to get Blizzard early on, then having this card and taking it adding to your deck would be a no-brainer, but without Blizzard, it's still right, but definitely not 100% pick, so probably be another B tier for me, somewhere in the middle towards, alongside Equilibrium and all of those defensive cards. I think this is something I usually take, but there are still some cases where I would skip this potentially as a very first reward. I'm not sure if I will take this honestly. And even when it comes to defense and blocking, there are still some better cards in my opinion. But still, B tier is a good middle ground, so don't think that anything I'll put on the B tier is a bad. It's not the case at all. Now, moving on, next we have Heatsinks. It's a power for 1 energy. Whenever you play a power, you draw 2 cards. And if you upgrade it, it will be 3 cards instead. Now, sometimes it can be slightly awkward if this card is somewhere at the bottom of your draw pile, of your draw deck. You already played all the other powers you have, and only then you draw this. Heatsinks you played, but because you no longer have any powers, you basically have no effect. This can be a little bit awkward. It does happen sometimes, but given the number of powers that Defect have, and many of them are so good that you generally will have more powers in your deck relatively probably to other characters. And even if you play just 1 or maybe 2 powers after playing Heatsink, that is still a lot of value. Depends on whether this card is upgraded or not. That is like additional 2 or maybe 3 times you can draw those either 2 or 3 cards. Of course, the more powers you have in your deck, the better this card gets, but overall I think it is fantastic. I do value draw effects quite a lot overall, and probably all the way to A tier, or maybe even S now as I think about it. Is there any case where I would skip this one? I mean, as a very first reward, likely yes. When you don't have any powers yet, this is a bit awkward. So yeah, this is why it will be an A tier for me, not quite S, even though the effect is absolutely amazing, but it's definitely more mid to late game card. So this is why an A tier for me. I will likely skip this super early in the game, but then I will likely pick as soon as I have at least a couple of powers. Moving on, next we have Hologram. It's a skill for 1 energy. Put a card, or first you gain 1 block, and then put a card from your discard pile into your hand, then exhaust. And if you upgrade it, it becomes reusable, no longer exhaust. And I would say Hologram is one of the most unique cards of Defect. Being able to put a card from your discard pile back to your hand means you can play it again, so it's effectively the same thing as a power potion or a skill potion, even though of course you're not triggering the effect twice as you would do on all those, power potion and a skill potion, but it is effectively the same thing. You can play something, provided the card is not exhausted, it goes to your discard pile, then you're following up with Hologram, bringing this card back to your hand, and then you're playing it again. This is an amazing effect to play for pretty much any way you play Defect for any build. You can play Blizzard multiple times, or you can play Reprogram several times, or Rainbow, and there are just so many cards that you can play 2 times in a turn and get just so much value. I think this card is so flexible and it adds so much momentum that being able just to play most cards twice, this is super good, and you definitely want to upgrade it to make it reusable so it no longer exhausts, and just across the board it is a fantastic value. 100% an S tier, maybe S plus if I be honest. Yeah, I'm happy to take this anytime. Moving on, next we have a power called Loop. For 1 energy, at the end of turn, trigger 1 orb's end of turn ability, and if you upgrade it, you will trigger 1 orb's end of turn ability twice. So if you have lightning orb or a frost orb, it is effectively the same thing as you would have another orb, or potentially 2 if you have upgraded Loop, because you would trigger any of your orbs 2 additional times, which means either more passive damage or more passive block, which is honestly really good. It's one of the quite rare cases of how you can scale and get more value out of those orbs. And even though it is, somewhat useless on the dark orb build, but even that, you still likely would want at least a couple of frost orbs, very likely, and Loop is an amazing way of getting more value out of your existing orbs. Naturally, this is not something you would want if you go full on the physical build. Without orbs at all, this would do pretty much nothing for you, but other than that, I'm pretty much always happy to have it. It's potentially as even a very first reward, because of the Defect's innate ability that we always already start with 1 lightning orb channeled. This is potentially already doubles the damage, so even as a very first reward, that is already quite decent, and yeah, I'm always happy to have it unless I'm playing purely on the physical build. So that will be probably another A tier for me. Not quite as I said, there are still cases where I would not pick it, but other than that, yeah, it is an excellent card. And speaking of excellent cards, we have Machine Learning. It's a power for 1 energy, start of turn, draw 1 card. And if you upgrade it, it becomes a 0 cost card. So even though you don't get any value on the turn you play this card, because the timing is at the start of turn, that means you only draw card at the start of the next turn. And that means you're always losing a little bit of momentum whenever you play this card. Even if you upgrade it and it costs 0 energy, you're still losing some opportunity of playing potentially another card that you could have drawn instead. So this is something I always consider. This momentum is really important. But thankfully though, it's not as punishing playing this card, especially if you upgrade it. 0 cost, it is fantastic value, and drawing 1 card at the start of every turn. That is honestly the absolute dream on any kind of build. I'm always happy to have this card, potentially even as a very first reward, even though I would say it gets even better as you progress through the run. So yeah, Machine Learning is definitely one of my favorite powers really. It's 100% an S tier for me. It provides so much reliability to your deck, so much consistency, because you draw in more cards. It means every turn you have more opportunities to play the exact card you want, and that is amazing value for me. So Machine Learning, another S tier. Now moving on, next we have Melter. It's an attack for 1 energy. First remove all block from the target, then deal 2 damage, and if you upgrade it, it will be 3 damage instead. Now just purely power wise, dealing either 2 or 3 damage for 1 energy, that is, you know, not as great, though of course the main effect of this card is probably the main intention is melting all these blocks, because first remove all block from the target. But do you really always need this? And probably not, and that is my main issue with this card, that is a bit situational. Obviously there are some cases where the enemies have a bunch of nasty block, so you're losing some value of your normal attack cards, but sometimes, or rather I would say most of the time, when your target don't have any blocks, this card is just kind of, you know, power-wise, kind of like upgraded strike, which is not as great in my view. I can definitely see some use cases for this card, and I can definitely see where it can be as good as dealing, you know, all the way of like 10 damage or something, provided the target has that much block. But to me that is a bit too situational, and probably something I would likely skip. It will likely be an F tier for me, maybe C. I can still see some value, but no, if I'm being completely honest, I don't think I pick this card often enough to put this even on the C tier. So sorry Melter, that is an F for me. Now moving on, next we have Overclock. It's a skill for 0 energy, draw 2 cards, then put a daze in your discard pile, and if you upgrade it, you would draw 3 cards instead. Now, daze is a quite nasty debuff. Whenever you draw daze, it means you're not drawing another card you could have potentially drawn instead, so you're always losing a little bit of momentum whenever you have daze. But on the other hand, you put this daze not in your draw pile, but in your discard pile, and it may take you a couple of turns before you even reach and reshuffle your discards to form a new draw deck, and only then it might take you still a few more turns potentially to draw that daze. So there is some negative condition in this card, but to me it is so delayed that I think it is alright given how much momentum it gives. I mean, drawing even 2 cards for 0 energy is amazing, but of course if you upgrade it and you draw 3 cards, that is just something you probably absolutely want on any kind of build really. And to me that is a likely definition of another S tier. Drawing 2 or 3 cards for 0 energy, yes please. Even though, as I said, you do have days, it is not something you immediately deal with, and sometimes you won't even reshuffle the deck at all, maybe if it's already somewhere towards you know, the late of the encounter, and you just need that 1 card that you know somewhere at the bottom of your draw pile. Yeah, Overclock is just amazing for that. Definitely another S tier for me. Moving on, next we have Recycle, another skill for 1 energy. Exhaust a card, gain energy equal to its cost. If its cost X, instead double your energy, and if you upgrade it, you can do these things for 0 energy. And this card is a little bit kind of similar to double energy that we already covered, but besides that, beside gaining energy, I also do quite like the exhaust effect on this card. It is generally pretty helpful against all curses and statuses, but oftentimes it's also really nice to just trim your deck and exhausting, for example, like basic strike or something you don't need throughout the fight. So that is quite useful. I quite like recycle, and sometimes you even get some energy or refund back, so to speak. Now, I'm not too huge fan of this card. It's not something I would 100% take, but it's a pretty decent utility. Sometimes you get extra energy, and you exhausting card is something I value quite a lot overall. So for me, this would likely be on the B tier, I think, something like that. Now, moving on, next we have Reinforced Body, which is a skill for X cost, and it says X +1 block, and it says specifically X cannot be 0. Now, in case you played the video game, where normally all X cost cards, they burn your entire energy, whatever your current energy is, and you play an X cost card, it just burns down to 0. But in the board game version, you can always choose the specific amount to spend on all of those X cards, so a little bit nice of quality of life improvement. And where normally X can be 0, but in this specific case it says specifically that it cannot be 0. But of course, if you upgrade it, it will turn in just twice the amount of block for whatever amount of energy you spend. So basically it's 1 energy 2 block, 2 energy 4 block, 3 energy 6 block, and so on. And so that is potentially a quite decent scalable block, even though it is somewhat expensive card. I mean, if you want to get a somewhat decent block, you need to pay quite a lot of energy. So I think the value, I mean, is not quite there for me. Yes, you can gain a lot of block from this card alone, which is fantastic, but it does get very, very expensive. And I think overall there are better ways of getting block for a fewer amount of energy. So that is my only kind of main issue with this card. And for that reason, I'm not too huge fan of it. Probably put on C tier. It's good in principle, it can save your run sometimes, but when it comes to value, I think there are better ways of mitigating damage. Moving on, next we have Reprogram. It's a skill for 1 energy, gain strength and then remove all of your orbs, and if you upgrade it, it costs 0 energy instead. And so this card is effectively an enabler for a completely different way of playing Defect. Instead of orbs, instead of relying on all of those elemental things like a lightning orb and frost orb and dark orb, you're just removing them completely, and instead you hopefully dealing some more sort of physical damage by scaling all of your normal attacks. And because it's a skill and not a power and it's not exhaust, it is something you can potentially repeat over and over again with something like skill potion or hologram. You can bring this card from your discard pile, play it again, and scale your damage very, very quickly. It is an amazing card power-wise, but obviously not something you would take if you already went for the sort of magical, for the elemental playing with your orbs. Because every time you play Reprogram, you're removing all of your orbs. And the remove is not the same as evoking, you're not gaining any value from your orbs at all. This is why it's usually either this or that, and you cannot really mix and match both of these magic and physical archetypes. So if I see Reprogram potentially as a very, very first reward, I almost 100% take it, but as soon as I progress a little bit maybe towards the Act 1, I already hopefully get some elemental cards, then most other times I will likely skip Reprogram. It is so build defiant, and it's so changing the way you make decisions on what other cards to take or skip, so it's definitely something you would consider early, ideally before your deck is already full of all of those orbs enhancing cards. So for that reason, I will probably put Reprogram, I think, on C tier, but purely because the window of when you can actually take this card relatively safely is just so narrow. It's basically just a couple of early encounters. Maybe if you get this from the Now's Blessing, that would be ideal, and maybe just a couple of early reward cards, you take it, that is still alright. But once you get at least 3, 4, maybe 5 of those different orb cards, then it's become almost a bit of waste of getting those cards. So this is why it's something you need to consider quite early if you have this card. And apart from that, it is unfortunately a skip most of the time if you have this card as a reward in Act 2, Act 3, even Act 4. Not something I would pick. Though power level wise, that would be an absolute and S tier card, 100%, but this is why I said that my ranking is not based on power, which is completely different thing. Instead, I'm ranking based on how often do I tend to pick or skip the card. And for Reprogram, that decision space where you can actually safely take this card is just too short to put it any higher than C. Now, moving on, next we have a Stack. It's a skill for 1 energy, gain block, give block to any player, and X is how many orbs you have, and if you upgrade it, it's gonna be +1. So even without the capacitor, let's say if you have all of your 3 orb slots full with orbs, that is already 4 block for just 1 energy, which is an amazing value. And potentially, if you do have the capacitor, the upgraded one, and you have all 6 orbs slots full with orbs, that means you can have up to 7 block for just a single energy. And not only that, but you can also give this block to any player. I think this is just honestly one of the best defensive cards of Defect. Not only it's a scalable block, but just the value is fantastic for just a single energy, up to 7 block in best case scenario, which isn't that hard to get, provided you do have capacitor. Though even without the capacitor, that is still quite decent, all the way to 4 block for a single energy. Yes, please, I'm happy to take this pretty much all the time, so that is going to be 100% an S tier card for me. And now, moving on, next we have Storm. It is a power at the start of turn, channel 1 lightning, and if you upgrade it, you would channel 2 lightning orbs at the start of every turn. As it often the case with most powers, you're not getting any value on the turn you put in this power in play, so naturally you do lose a bit of momentum, but I think in this case it pays off quite nicely. Even if you don't have any way of scale these lightning orbs, that is still quite alright, because you channel 2 lightning orbs at the start of each turn. It means naturally that your orbs will evoke quite often, as well as that is some additional value, some other extra damage from lightning orbs that you evoke in, or potentially even dark orbs if you have any. So yeah, overall I think the damage wise it is a pretty decent card. Obviously it's not something you would take if you go for the Reprogram build, but it's still really nice, and I'm taking it pretty much almost all the time. I would say A tier for me, not 100%. It's not as universally good across any builds, but I think it's strong enough to deserve an A tier for me, 100%. Moving on, next we have Streamline. It's an attack for 2 energy, deals 3 damage and costs 1 less energy for each power you have in play, and if you upgrade it, it will deal 4 damage instead. So it's pretty much the same thing as we already covered with Force Field, that card that scales with the number of powers you already have in play. The cost gets reduced for every power you have. The same for Streamline, but it deals damage. And actually my reasoning is the same as for that card. Simply because Defect has so many useful powers, it means you almost always will have at least 3 powers, at least somewhere starting in the middle of the game. So that is very often becomes just a 0 cost card. So I quite like it for that reason, especially if you have something like a beam cell that you can ×2 that damage with vulnerable. It's a nice, potentially big attack, at least relatively to most other attacks, with just exception of few. It's not as great, it's not maybe as universally harmful as Force Field. I think there are better ways of dealing damage or as a Defect, but this is nice, and it is especially nice for a physical build if you have a Reprogram to scale the damage further. So not maybe as good without Reprogram, but still not too bad. I think I'll still put this on a C tier, even though it is very similar to Force Field, which is on the B tier, but I think this card does require having Reprogram to kind of be on a full potential. This is why I'll put this probably next to Reprogram, which is just slightly more conditional, kind of situational compared to Force Field. Moving on, next we have Sunder. Its attack for 3 energy, deals 5 damage, and if this kills the enemy, you gain 3 energy refunded back, and if you upgrade it, it will deal 7 damage instead. Now 5 for especially 7 damage is a nice chunky big hit of damage. Once again, especially with vulnerable, if you have beam cell, that is potentially a nice card for that, but I think it's just too expensive, and its main condition that if this kills the enemy you gain this refund, obviously won't work against single target elite or bosses, and that is my main issue with this card. Ironclad has a somewhat similar card, I believe it's called Feed, where if it kills the enemy you gain some strength, which is quite nice effect on a smaller minions or whatnot, but this gets pretty much no value from this effect against all the bosses and single targets. For that reason I'm not a huge fan of Sunder, even though of course if you get this as a potentially Act 1 very first reward, you can just breeze through the act really nicely, where most of the enemies they still have just 5 or 7 health. That can be really fun, but once you get towards, you know, Act 2 and especially 3, I think even minions they get much more beefier, they have like 10 or 14 health sometimes, so even 5 damage is not that big of a deal, especially for 3 energy. So unfortunately, it is one of the cards that I mostly skip most of the time. I know some people might disagree with this, I can totally see for some people that could be even all the way to S tier card, but for me that's not quite the case. As I said, most of the time I do tend to skip it, at least that's how been my experience with this card so far. And last but not least we have Tempest. It's a skill for X cost, channel X lightning and then exhaust, and if you upgrade it you would channel X +1. So once again, all X cost cards you can choose the amount of energy spent. Let's say if you have 3 energy you can choose to spend on the 1 or 2 or 3 or even 0. So on the upgraded side you can spend 0 energy and still channel 1 lightning orb, which is quite nice. And of course if all of your orb slots are already full and you cast Tempest to channel a lot of more lightning orbs, that means you would evoke all the orbs you already have, which can be a good strength additional kind of effect on its own, quite useful especially if you have dark orbs, or even with just lightning orbs that's just potentially more damage, which is, you know, always a good thing. I will say though that this card does get better over time towards, you know, the mid and late game, as you generally have more flexibility with your energy, you have more cards, you have maybe more relics to gain more energy, even though in the early game that still can be quite helpful, though when it comes to lightning orbs I think there are just slightly better cards. Overall, pretty good card, but maybe not as good as some other powers we have on the A tier, so this is why I'll put this on the B. I think that's just a nice middle ground, though potentially it does get much better towards the late game. So there you have it, all Defect uncommon cards ranked. And well, that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you find it helpful, and if you did, please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I would really appreciate this as well. Now, in case you don't know, I have some other Slay the Spire videos already on the channel as well. Things like beginner guides, for example, how to beat all elites, or character specific guides where I go over the general archetypes and builds and synergies, and of course more videos coming up, so stay tuned for that. And well, as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.